Yep.
They're having so much trouble.
No worries, no worries. Just whenever it happens, I wouldn't. There's no hurry on it. Just whenever you can, that'd be great. So,
Okay, I'll work.
like I say, not a big deal. Like I say, the biggest thing is you pass your test. So, don't worry about the rest of the shit.
Yeah, appreciate it.
I don't want to stress. The only thing to be stressed about, and I shouldn't say stress, adrenaline. There's a healthy amount of nervousness that is okay. It's all right. So we'll just pick it up where we left off. Fly high on the retirement plans. So tomorrow you're just gonna get some basic stuff. So again, we're just poking around in your brain housing group, Chris. And as we said, our Hippocratic oath is first do no harm. So we don't want to go backwards. So, if I'm asking you things, just remember that tomorrow they would actually have a 1 in 4 chance of you being correct because it'll be there for you. So if I funded my retirement plan pre-tax, when can I choose to start drawing money out of my retirement plan without a penalty?
After 72.5.
Well, no. Be careful what I asked. When can I choose to start? I'm looking for the early number.
59.5.
There you go.
Yes.
And if I do it before that, then what's going to be the consequences to me?
You get a 10% penalty.
Excellent. And then remember, the required minimum distributions, RMDs, is 73. That's been changed with the Secure Act. So that's called an RMD. Anti-money laundering is very, very testable. So, what gives me, the financial institution, Chris, the authority to send your private confidential banking information to the Department of Treasury, FinCEN? I would know FinCEN is where we're going to send these things to. Do you know what that's called? That's called test question, the Bank Secrecy Act. It's kind of counterintuitive because what it allows is the financial institution not to be secret.
Right.
So there's a couple test questions here on your exam. One is, I can never compromise my client's private information. So you got to be careful when you're doing the context of the question, unless it's the US government. And, if they want to know about your private dealings, Chris, I'm rolling over. Now we go with the proper court order, right? I'm just not going to dime you out. Okay, so money laundering is trying to turn my dirty money into clean money. And there are 3 stages of money laundering. The first stage test question is placement. I need a place to put my dirty money. Whether it be a car wash or a bar or, whatever. A second stage is layering. What I do there is I mix my dirty money with my clean money. And then the final destination is integration, where you no longer can tell the Dean's clean money from the dirty money. Now, I would debate whether or not this is true. But, I was buying a Harley and the dealer told me that bike isn't leaving the lot with a check. And I said, well, you can verify the funds on that check and it's good. He goes, I don't care if it's verified funds or not. The bike doesn't leave the lot with a check. So I went and got him a cashier's check for $21,000. Now, when I did so, he sent me a copy of the test question, the currency transaction report that he had sent to FinCEN. The Dean did a cash transaction test question of more than how much money?
$10,000.
Right on. Now, Chris, what if he had told me about that? And so instead of coming back to the dealer with a check for $21,000, Dean comes back with 3 cashier's checks for $7,000. What would that be? That'd be called
structuring.
Right on. That's called structuring. You absolutely got it right. Now, every firm has to appoint an AML officer, and we have to have WSPs. That's pretty important. Every firm has WSPs. Do you know what WSPs stand for?
No, I do not. Not on top of my head.
Written supervisory procedures. Written supervisory procedures. And in our WSPs, we have to have a section on money laundering. I should say anti-money laundering, not how to, anti-money laundering. And we ask Chris, every new hire, to read our WSPs. And then we ask you to sign, acknowledging that you read it and you understood it. So in the future, you can't say, well, that wasn't on my SIE exam, so how am I supposed to know? Now, so as part of these procedures, we're going to have a AML officer, and we're going to conduct an AML test annually. Now, you gave me a good example of structuring, or I gave you one, and you told me it was structuring. You're correct. We call that a red flag on the exam. Red flags are things that go, this looks a little suspicious. And that would trigger a suspicious activity report, perhaps, for amounts of
5,000 and more.
Yeah, Dean's getting a little lazy here. I should stop being lazy and make sure I got what we need here, right? So that's
Okay.
more than 10,000. This is 5,000 or more. And your point, you're correct. Now, what would be some other red flags you might encounter on your exam? What would be some other red flags that perhaps would trigger a CTR besides what I just brought up, structuring? Origin of funds. So
Yeah.
Dean's wiring the money from, Monaco, or and Monaco's a real place. I don't know. Not everybody wiring money from Monaco is a money launderer, but
Right.
you get Belize, the Caymans, you get the idea here, right?
Yeah.
Then the other thing would be transactions that are commercially illogical. I was talking to my brother about this particular person, and I said, Chris, my problem with the guy is what he's doing is commercially illogical. I can't figure out the commercial thing here. It's a red flag that something's not right if I can't figure this out about what he's doing. A lack of worrying about economics. For one guy, they're still on the lam. He's still on the lam, but they're looking for him. He paid Britney Spears like $5 million to fly in and sing him happy birthday. Now, Chris, we know that Schwartzman, he played the Rolling Stones. He's a Blackstone guy.
Yeah.
But we know where his 5 million came from. I think he paid this Rolling Stones, 30 million, but we know where his money came from. This guy, everybody said, that's kind of odd. He doesn't really care about the money, in an economic sense. So it seems like it's a red flag that it may be not real money to him, right? So that would be what we call commercially illogical, unworried about the economics of something, right? They just, you get the idea of that kind of a personality. We said it's attestable to know that we're filing the CTR and the SAR with FinCEN. So that's where those forms are going. Now, the other thing we're going to do is check our our new client against the OFAC to make sure you're not somebody who's been designated as somebody that we shouldn't be doing business with. This happened here recently with some of the Russian oligarchs. We say, okay, we put some new guys on the list. So maybe I'm doing business with this guy and he's okay. And then all of a sudden now there's a new list of sanctioned people. And I have to compare that with OFAC and make sure I'm not actually doing business with somebody that I'm not supposed to be doing business with. Books and record retention. So the vast majority of brokerage firm records are, what is the record retention? The most common record retention of a broker dealer. Very testable, 3 years. So if I ask you how long broker dealers have record retention, the vast majority of the records are going to be 3 years. There's one record that is 4 years, only one. And then there are a couple records that are 5. And then there's a lifetime and 6. Okay, so let's start with 4-year records. That one, we said the biggest bucket is the 3-year bucket. And then the only thing that is 4 is customer complaints. So got written customer complaints are a 4-year record. And those complaints have to be handled by a supervisor, right? So we don't let reps handle their own complaints. So that's the other one. 5-year is money laundering records. So that's that CTR and that SAR we talked about. That's a 5-year record. Lifetime of a brokerage firm is going to be what I have a memory aid device for you here called SPAM. That stands for stock certificates, the owners of the firm. We don't mean the stock certificates, Chris, of the customers. We mean the ownership of the firm, because there's people who've been barred and we want to make sure there's nobody who's been barred that's involved in this broker dealer. So if I'm a regulator and I say, where's your stock record? And you say, well, Dean, we're a partnership. I say, okay, smart ass, where's your partnership agreement? right? So P would mean if we're organized as a partnership, same deal, by the way, make sure there's no partners here that have been barred from the securities industry. Unfortunately, our business, the industry has one of the highest rates of recidivism, meaning, these guys can never go straight, so we shut them down and then they like hydras head, then they're over there again. I go, what are you doing here? You're not supposed to be in this business, right? Articles of incorporation. This is embarrassing. Sometimes we'll name a rule after you. It's not cool to get a rule named after you, like the Drexel rule, for example. So articles of incorporations, minutes of the directors meetings, that's the M. And that's so that, we can go back and when we shut you down, look and say, okay, should we propose a new rule? Right? Where was there a fork in the road and this broker dealer went left and they should have gone right? Let's make a new rule for them. And then I think of the 6-year records as items of original entry. What I mean by that is these are things that would be hard to fake. Like our blotters of the stocks we bought and sold each day. Our general ledger, our accounting. Those are the kind of things that I was teaching a 24 class and the guy was from FINRA. And we were both kind of saying, we were really upset that nobody caught Bernie Madoff, and because it would have been very easy to catch him because he was just creating fake records. And all somebody had to do was kind of just take one more step from his lie of his records and say, okay, well, Chris, that's great, but why don't you actually show me your items of original entry? Now he could have faked that, but that would have been much more difficult. At least it would have taken him a little more effort to try and, fake that kind of stuff. Okay, so confirmations, account statements. When do confirmations have to go out to the customer? By settlement. By settlement. Confirmation is I think of it as a receipt of what you bought or sold with us. And do you remember from our previous session, one of the biggest disclosures we're going to make on that confirmation to the customer? Capacity. Capacity, whether we acted our broker capacity or our dealer capacity. Account statements, what is the frequency of account statements?
Annually.
Quarterly.
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 Okay.
So statements are going to be quarterly. Now there's an exception to that. There are circumstances in which it's not going to be quarterly. It's going to be monthly.
Penny stocks?
Woohoo! Right on. So now you know what I'm going to be here, Chris, a jerk, and say, okay, what is a penny stock? You're correct. So very testable. If you have a penny stock in your brokerage account, you're going to get a statement monthly instead of quarterly. And then my follow-up question to you is, what is a penny stock?
Penny stock is it's a not unlisted exchange, or it's unlisted.
Love it, love it. Not, yeah, that's you're right on it. A non-NASDAQ over-the-counter stock is the technical way of saying that, but you're correct.
Yeah. That's less than $5 or $5 or less.
Correct. You're absolutely correct. You nailed it. Okay, so there's also some other rules about those penny stocks.
They have to send a notice. I know what it is. They have to sign a disclosure agreement.
You're right on. Now remember, I'm asking you to pick it out of the stratosphere, and you're going to get it because you're in the test. Remember, you're going to have that in front of you.
Yes.
You're right. It's a suitability statement to say, Chris, I want you to acknowledge that you understand you're buying a speculative low price security. So that's called the suitability statement. Now, Chris, another test question is I don't have to get that or get that signed acknowledgement, that suitability statement, if you are an established customer of the broker dealer. And so what would make you an established customer of the broker dealer?
Is that you've been with the broker dealer for 2 years?
A year.
A year. And if you have some, if I'm not mistaken, like if you've already had penny stocks in there and or you have a net worth of
well I'm looking for how many transactions would make me an established customer. Three transactions. So your point, 2 ways to become an established customer. Your first one, a year, and the other one is 3 transactions in a 12-month period. So I say, hey, Chris, I'm going to be traveling with my missionary father in the Philippines. We're going to be in Mindanao, where the leading industry is kidnapping, and I'd like you to hold on to my statements. I'd like you to hold my customer mail. So the answer is, how long can you hold my mail for me? So, I call you and you say, hey, Dean, we can't hold your mail. This is the test question, not for convenience. And so, you could actually go into an internet cafe, Dean, and get your statements. So I can't just hold these because you're at convenience. I go, Chris, if I go into an internet cafe and I punch into my brokerage account, it's going to move me up on the kidnap list. So please continue to hold my mail. So the test question is, we can continue to hold mail, not for convenience, but for security reasons. Right. So I'm not going to force you to get your statements if you're, I joke, I was in the Marine Corps. If you're in a combat zone, I'm not going to give you grief about sending you your statements. Now we had 9/11, and we've had hurricanes, we've had terrorist attacks, and we've had natural disasters. And as a result of that, we make brokerage firms, financial institutions, have business continuity plans about how they plan to respond to those kind of events and in a way that they can still service their customers. That's called the business continuity plan. Every firm must have one. And the test question is, where would you find, as a customer of a broker dealer, the business continuity plan? Test question, there has to be a link on the firm's website, a link that a customer can hit that says business continuity plan. Now, Chris, if you hit the link, it's either going to give you the business continuity plan or tell you how to get it. Right. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a link where you hit it and you get it. But it could be a link where we say, Chris, if you were interested in a copy of our business continuity plan, please send us a, written letter, to whatever. And we're more than happy to provide that to you. Test question, what's the other link that would be on a broker dealer's website besides the business continuity plan? So there's two links that are mandatory. Broker check.
Broker check, that's right.
Broker check,
okay.
right? So I could put Chris's name in there and comes back and tells me, whether you're a rogue broker or not. So customer protection and custody of customers' assets, it's really bad. It's bad for public confidence when broker dealers, fail and we can't find the customer's monies and securities. And so broker dealers are required to have certain net capital standards. And if you don't meet those net capital standards, you're going to get liquidated. For example, Bernie Madoff, right? And so who will be appointed to liquidate a broker dealer to protect customer assets if that broker dealer gets shut down? Very testable, SIPC, right? So I call you and say, hey, Chris, I got some good news and I got some bad news for you. I'm a SIPC trustee. The guy for Bernie Madoff was a guy named Irving Picard. So I call you and say, hey, Chris, this is Irving Picard. I've been appointed as the SIPC trustee to liquidate Bernie Madoff securities. And so I have some good news and some bad news. The good news, Chris, is you're not going to lose any more money down here because I'm shutting them down. The bad news, Chris, is I can't find your stuff. If I can find your customer assets, if this guy did what he's supposed to do, this firm, we should be able to find your money and securities, and I'm going to send them out to you, Chris. But I'm thinking I'm not going to be able to find any property here. So I think, Chris, you're going to have a SIPC claim. You're going to have a SIPC claim. Test question. How large can your SIPC claim be?
250,000 in cash and 500,000 in equities.
Nailed it. That's exactly right. Per separate customer. So every account that you have here that has different beneficial ownership. So if you have a wife, it's a separate account. The kid's up, but we discussed in our previous session is a separate account. So the way I think about it is different tax ID numbers, even though that could let you down a little bit because it could be three accounts. If it's a husband and then a wife and then their joint account, that would be three accounts. But again, on the SIE, they don't get too much in the weeds on stuff. It's more high fly high kind of stuff. But when you come back for your 70, all this stuff gets a little more deeper, right? A little more depth to it. All right. So I have a responsibility to protect your information. When you think about it, I've got lots of stuff that if somebody was a hacker would love, right? As a broker dealer, I have your tax ID number, I have your address, I have all kinds of things. And so, Chris, I have a responsibility to protect you from identity theft. I need to make sure that you are who you claim to be and that I protect that. And that's called Regulation SP. And what this is about is broker dealers making sure they're protecting the customer's non-public personal information. and the confidentiality of that information. Now, we said the exception to this on your test is if the government has a court order is asking me things about you, then I'm going to, I'm going to tell them. But other than that, we're not supposed to give people's privacy thing. Notifications, we tell you what we're doing it, how we're safeguarding it. And it also means that if I'm going to use this information like cross-solicit or something, I need your permission. Right. So, for example, if I'm a Merrill Lynch broker and you're a Bank of America customer, not Merrill Lynch, and I want to solicit Bank of America customers, we need to, get your permission to let, Merrill brokers solicit you. Communication with the public. So what can you tell me about when I can make a cold call? By the way, kind of a tricky question in this regard is where the phone is ringing. So kind of stupid, right? But it's,
Yeah.
So when can I start cold calling? What time in the morning can I start waking people up?
9 a.m.
8 a.m.
8 a.m.
8 a.m.
It stops at 9 p.m.
There you go. That's exactly right. Chris, I almost made it through my entire 30-year career with no written customer complaints. In fact, FINRA came in and said, where's your complaint file? I said, I don't have one. And this guy, Lenny, he drives me nuts. He goes, well, Dean, what if you get one? He made me open up like a Pendaflex. And then he said I should every quarter go in there and say none received. But one of my go-to moves, Chris, that I used over the years is I would send you a nice handwritten note saying, Chris, thought you'd find this of interest. It was called a teaser, my next deal that I'm going to be doing. And it's just a little sheet, term sheet kind of thing. And then I'd follow it up. Anyways, I do send this out to my, people, my prospects and clients about every, 6-12 months. Anyways, I got a call from this guy. And he says, hey, Dean, he says, I don't want to see any more of these things. Thanks, but no thanks. And then I said, Chris, I apologize by just pulling up your record here. And I see there's one more in the mail to you. But after that, you won't see any more things from me. He goes, cool. No problem, right? And I told my sales assistant, I said, hey, send out the teaser to the usual list of suspects that work at this particular company. And one of my things, again, is hand addressed envelopes, snail mail. And then, she queues up my calls and I come in. And anyways, I queue up my calls and there's this guy. I go, oh, my God. I'm thinking, maybe he didn't make it to his desk. I'm like, oh, my God, And while I'm thinking about it, ping, it's this guy, WTF, exclamation point. I thought, oh, my God. Anyways, I called and apologized profusely. I said, Chris, I apologize. Here's what happened. My sales assistant, I don't remove your record completely because in the past I would accidentally reintroduce you. But what I do is in every field I put do not call. And what happened is she didn't look at that. I'm not blaming her. It's my bad too. But she just started going through the list of people and doing her thing. And, and I apologize profusely. But you'll never hear from me again. He goes, really? I'm still traumatized. Anyways, here's the point. Then I get this email from Chris. I got to decide that's a written complaint because that would put a stop to my unblemished career. And I thought, man, I better call that a complaint, right? Because it's an email, WTF. And I told that Lenny guy, if he finds that in my email, what's being archived, he's going to, gotcha. So anyways, you're correct about 8 to 9. And then remember this guy, I have to put a test question on my do not call list. I have to make sure that my do not call list, I'm going to call people. There's a national registry where people have been asked not to be bothered. Very testable. I say, Chris, for me to do a really good job for you over time, I need to know a lot about you. The more I know about you, Chris, the better I'm going to be at determining suitability. And you say, well, Dean, that's none of your damn business. I said, well, au contraire, my friend. FINRA says that we have a know your customer kind of suitability standard. KYC, this is called. Right now, if you don't agree to give me that information, well, then I'm not going to be able to make recommendations. So be careful. I can still open the account, but, let's say Bill Gates refuses to give me, suitability information. I'm going to put, well, I guess I can't put richest man in the world. I put under suitability, third richest man in the world. Right. And, if I have a way of determining suitability, I can still recommend perhaps to him muni bonds, but I won't be able to make recommendations unless I have some basis for that recommendation. Right. Can still do business on an unsolicited basis. Market manipulation. Again, not how to. Don't do it, right? Don't do it. We're not supposed to engage in rumors. No rumor mongering. A pump and dump. if you saw Wolf of Wall Street, Jordan Belfort was a real guy, Stratton Oakmont, and he was the master of the pump and dump. So the pump is where we get a bunch of Joe six packs to buy the stock. We don't let them sell. And you're supposed to follow your customer instructions, but Belfort would say, Chris, you'll thank me later, but I'm not going to let you sell this. And then once we get it up, we dump it. Now, that's a lot easier to do in penny stocks. I mean, it's hard, Chris, for us to execute a pump and dump on Apple, for example.
Right.
It's got to be a thinly traded type of stock. Front running is very testable. That's trading ahead of customers. Maybe Fidelity's my customer. I wish. And I know Fidelity's bonds funds are going to start buying the security, whether it's a stock or bond. I buy it for me first. Excessive trading, very testable. You know what that's called?
Churning, right? Right
on. I say, hey, Chris, I always like to end the day on a good note. So I'd like you, Chris, to run a trade at the end of the close, on an uptick. So marking the close is when I do a trade just to make sure we close on an uptick. Now, I wouldn't on the SIE worry about this, but the reason I need the uptick is to engage in shenanigans the next day. Right. So, marking the open, same deal. Like I say, hey, Chris, I like to start the morning feeling pretty good. So I don't really care about the independent market of the security, Chris. Just, if the ask is 15, let's do it at 1505 just to give the market a good, punch out of the gate. You remember what I told you backing way was? That's when a market maker fails to honor a firm quote.
That's right.
Remember my last session, I had a bid and an ask, and I had the size of my quote. I think it was like 10 by 8 or whatever it was. And then that would be when I'm posting that, and then I'm not willing to transact business at that stated quote and the size. So it's when a market maker fails to honor a firm quote. And then, that's a trade practice complaint. And so when you have a trade practice complaint, right, you would call FINRA Department of Enforcement, and they call me and they say, hey, Dean, this is the FINRA Department of Enforcement, and we've received a trade practice complaint and you're backing away. Do you know what free riding is?
Free riding. You buy a stock and then you sell it before it hits the market or something,
well,
right? Or
right on, you're on the right track, exactly. I guess it's like cutting a check. You buy the stock and sell the stock without paying for the buy. So I say, Chris, you bought the stock and you sold the stock and you haven't paid for the buy. So Chris, you didn't use your money to do that trade. You used broker dealer money to do that trade. You took a free ride, a ride you did not pay for. And so what do we do to people who take free rides? So I'm going to sell you out. So let's say, Chris, by the time I sell you out, you bought that stock at 40, you didn't pay me, the stock's at 50 and I sell you out, there's a profit. I have to give you the profit. Yeah, I'm going to give you the profit, but I'm going to say, Chris, we have pretty liberal credit privileges at the broker dealer. So now I'm going to test question, freeze your account. I'm going to freeze your account. So how long is your account going to be frozen?
15 days.
90 days. 90 days, you have no credit privilege.
90 days, that's right.
So no credit privilege. Now remember, that doesn't mean I'm not going to trade for you. What's frozen is not your ability to trade. What's frozen is your credit privileges. So moving forward, Chris, for the next 90 days, I want your money or your securities up front. I want your monies and securities up front. In other marketplaces, international markets, Chris, other places around the world, I'd say, Chris, you worked damn hard to become an insider. And what was the point of becoming an insider if you can't profit from that? That's not the US. No, right? So we had problems with people getting caught for insider trading. And then they would respond by saying, what do I owe you? A lot of brokers think we have a fee-based ethics system. And so Congress came up with what's called the Insider Trading Act of 1988. Now, you might think we had problems in 87, and you'd be correct. Behind every act, there's some kind of a story. And so the prosecutors said to Congress, if you give us the Insider Trading Act of 88, we're going to be able to throw a lot more people in jail. So the definition of insider trading is using material non-public information. So material means it would alter your decision. Now, if you knew there was a buyout coming, you wouldn't be selling the stock to me. All right, so material means it would alter a decision. That's kind of an important word. Immaterial means that you wouldn't alter somebody's decision. So, there's kind of pivot words sometimes on exams, and one of them is material, right? Non-public. Identifying the involved parties. So again, the test question here is who is liable for the insider tracked at 88? Everybody. Rep A, firm 1, rep B, firm 2. What I mean by this is no transaction need occur for people to be in trouble for this. If I leak the information to you, Chris, and I receive any personal benefit, then, I'm going to be in trouble. Now, test question, every firm has to have in their WSPs, remember that? In their WSPs, a section on insider trading. Prior to 1988, it was just civil, meaning you write a check. And so, prior to 88, I go, okay, you got me. What do I owe? And they'd say 3 million. I go, great, I'm up 9. So I'm up 6. I give you the 3. Hey, by the way, is that 3 million deductibles a business expense? It is. Well, we'll go, well, all right, well, who cares? So test question number 1. Now they say, Dean, you made 9 million. It's 27 million. I go, wow, there's hardly any profit in it anymore. So the civil fine is triple damages. That's testable. Triple, right? So if I make 9, I owe 27. And to be honest with you, writing checks doesn't scare brokers because we handle money all day long. But going to jail and making new friends, that does scare us. And so test question number 2, it's both a civil penalty and a criminal penalty, meaning incarceration. What an idiot, this a friend of a friend, he's in our circle with, I guess I'm the only one who is more of a stand-up guy than the rest of us. This guy drove himself to Taft, which was the federal prison, and, left his wife without the car. And so, she got called and said, well, you go down to Taft and, get the car. And I'm like, yeah, I'll go down there. Anyways, I went into the reception area to get the keys, and I was trying to figure out what the way to do it. I said, the guy goes, do you mean he's incarcerated here? I go, ooh, that's kind of a harsh word. But yeah, I guess that's what I mean. Other prohibited activities. I say, hey, Chris, it must be so cool to be at the front of the line in those IPOs. IPO stands for instant profit opportunity. No, I'm joking. Stands for it's probably overpriced. No, I'm joking. But, and we say we can't restrict, we have to make a bona fide distribution of this security to the customer. So one of our restrictions is employees of the broker dealer are not allowed to have the IPO allocation, right? In other words, if we didn't have that rule, the customer would never see the good stuff because we'd be keeping it for ourselves. So now I'm your immediate family member. I say, hey, Chris, how about some IPO allocation for me? I said, well, immediate family members are also restricted persons, meaning they can't have IPO allocations. Your immediate family would be, your spouse, your siblings, your parents, directly lineal to you. It wouldn't be your aunt or your grandma. Now, be careful. My grandma lived on my property and I paid her bills. And so what I might want to be tempted to do, Chris, is give my grandma a hot IPO so that I no longer have to financially support her. Right. And so instead of giving this hot issue, it's not a test term anymore, but we used to call it a hot issue. But instead of giving it to the client, I give it to grandma. Now, the trick here is if it's somebody who's financially dependent on me, they slide back into the restricted category. So even though my grandma, if she's on her own, paying her own bills, isn't part of this restriction, if she's financially dependent on me and I'm paying her bills, and she goes back into that category. You're my customer. I say, Chris, you're so rich and I'm so poor. How about a loan? Associated persons are never supposed to borrow from customers. Be careful, Chris, unless the customer is a lending institution. What I mean by that is if I'm a customer of the bank and I go through the normal procedures to get a loan, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about me approaching my customer, a physical human being, living, breathing human being, walking planet Earth, not a financial institution, and say, hey, how about a loan? Now be careful on this next one. Some of these I call them, really? So, one of the things you can get in trouble with is, what is best practice versus what is the test question, right? I don't know of any firm, this is going to be what I'm about to tell you is the test answer. I tell my principal, my customer and me have really bonded. We've decided that we're going to open an account together. I'm going to put in 500 grand. He's going to put in 500 grand and we're going to split 50-50. Now, outside of SIE fantasy land, this guy's going to say, are you nuts? But in the SIE fantasy land, the answer is, can you share in a customer account? You can, with proportionate capital and principal approval. Proportionate capital and principal approval. Now, you shouldn't struggle on the principal approval part because that's true of any, thing, right? That's true of anything that we're going to be talking about. Okay, so it's disgusting. My mom is a senior, and it just is disgusting how many people wake up in the morning trying to rip off seniors like my mom. I mean, I can't tell you how many scams that I say, Mom, it's a scam. The Amazon doesn't want you to go to Target and show your ID and get a gift card. I mean, trust me, Bezos isn't, calling you. First test question is, again, don't you love it? In our WSPs, our written supervisory procedures, we have to say, what are we doing to protect seniors? And so our first question is, what is the definition of a senior that needs protection?
65 and over.
There you go. And so most of us, Chris, have what we call a trusted contact person, right? So in my mom's case, it would be me. And maybe the bank calls me and says, hey, Dean, your mom's down here. She's trying to wire some money to some prince. I go, really? I thought you watched enough Dr. Phil to know that's probably not a good idea. And what it allows us to do is put a temporary hold on transactions of the senior until we can contact their trusted contact person to make sure everything's hunky-dory, right? Now, be careful. It's not a power of attorney. I don't have control over mom's assets. It just gives the bank, our brokerage firm in this case, the opportunity to put a temporary hold while they try and reach out to a trusted contact person. Unregistered is a terrible word. Unregistered. I had a big time guy, and he said, Dean, I would really like to be able to pay Danny because, Danny gives me lots of referrals to people, and boy, the people he refers me to are so awesome. But I can't pay unregistered persons. And I said to him, I said, well, the solution here is to get Danny registered. Because if Danny is registered, then he can what? He can be paid, right? So you can't pay people. Now, where this comes up on the test, Chris, is there's a lot of times some very top producing life insurance folks, they've been doing their business the old fashioned way for a long time. And maybe they don't want to go get the securities registrations necessary to sell, for example, a variable annuity, because that variable annuity is a mutual fund with the insurance wrapper. And so they say to me, hey, Dean, how about I use your rep number? The commission's $8,000. I'll pay you a couple grand for using your rep number. Absolutely not, right? Solicitation of customers and taking orders requires you to be registered. So this is a negative test question about what I mean by negative is what registered people can do, get commissions, and what unregistered persons cannot do, get commissions, right? They can't be paid for transactions. Falsifying withholding documents. That's a big no. Signatures of convenience mean, a lot of firms get in bad habits. And so, it would be a red flag, Chris, if I say, hey, Chris, instead of me tracking you down all the time, why don't you just give me some signed blank paper that if I need to, I can put it in, print it, and we're back in business. No. Right. So, each time we're talking about something that requires a signature, sometimes the technical word for that is positive affirmation, meaning I need you to sign something. And then we always should respond to regulatory requests. And we talked about prohibited activities. Needless to say, if somebody asks you to get rid of some kind of a record and shred it. You're supposed to, I don't think we're supposed to do that, right? We want to be able to know what's going on. I told you I'm following as a voyeur that FTX situation, and what a mess. Apparently there's no records. The guy say, I still can't figure out what the heck's going on. I think we're missing like $6 billion. I'm like, wow, crazy. So it would be easier. All right, so let's start now. We got that part done. So let's just go back to what we're doing here. So we've been working our way through section 3. We started with section 2, 33 questions. We just finished an overview of section 3, 23 questions. And now we're going to go back to knowledge of capital markets, 12 questions, and work our way through that. In my playlist on my YouTube channel, Chris, I decided finally just not to use this order. And so what I do is front load the section 2, I make first, right? And then I make section 3 the second, and then you can see that I have section 4 at the end because it's 7 questions, right? So, well, we said the SEC is God, right? In the securities industry, they have primary jurisdiction, interpretation, and enforcement of the domestic securities laws of the United States of America. Now, there's 2 major pieces of legislation. One of them actually created the SEC. And do you recall those 2 major pieces of legislation? 33
and 34.
Yeah, and you can get some questions right on your exam by just covering up the screen and saying, are they asking about paper? Or are they asking about people? Paper prospectus. If I'm asking about prospectuses, 33 says, again, very important. 33 says, if you're going to sell brand new securities, what kind of securities? Brand new, to the public. To whom? The public. Then you're going to have to make a registration statement with the SEC. That's 33. I'm going to make a registration statement, and then I'm going to have to give you a prospectus so you can make an informed decision. Prior to 33, I'd say, trust me, Chris, you're going to love it. And you'd say, can you send me something? And I would have nothing to send. Now, these were companion pieces of legislation. So Congress knew when they passed 33 that 34 was coming, and that created the SEC. And that's about the people and places. That's, New York, NASDAQ, associated persons. So that's people and places. And so, President Roosevelt, by the way, the securities industry was not a big fan of these. And he said, you'll thank me later because this will promote public confidence in the securities industries. And, you guys in the securities industry have a bad rap, and this is going to help you kind of clean up your reputation. And then the SEC appoints, well, I shouldn't say appoints. The SEC has some help from FINRA, the self-regulatory organizations. So, right, you're getting going to be the official title of what you're going to be when you get this all done, not your SIE, because that requires no registration. But, the next step is, remember, your Series 7, and what you're going to become is an associated person of a member firm. An associated person of a member firm, a member of FINRA. CBOE is an SRO, the MSRB is an SRO, but the one you want to be aware of is FINRA. Now we know that FINRA is a self-regulatory organization. Now we have kind of been going backwards here, right? We did 2 and 3, and now we're rotating back to 1. But we did talk about the Department of Treasury. And to recall the 2 Department of Treasury things that we need to be aware of is FinCEN, and OFAC. And you remember what those 2 were, FinCEN and OFAC? FinCEN is where we send the CTRs and the SARSs to. And OFAC is where we check to make sure we're not doing business with somebody who's been, sanctioned. And we compare that to our list, right? The IRS, I think, is pretty straightforward. Remember, the test question about the IRS is that the IRS asks us for information, with proper legal documents. And remember, I am going to tell the IRS what they want to know about you. State regulators, So I think of the SEC is God and state administrators are demigods. So, if as a retail investor, Chris, I'm coming to you from Nevada. Oh, Chris, you're in California. Whew. Yeah, your former state administrator was Kamala Harris. Right. And woof, there's nothing that makes you more popular than throwing brokers in jail. I'm joking, but not really. So that's called the state administrator. And so, we always have a sign that you're leaving state A and going into state B because, the rules could be substantially different. Anyways, the state administrator is going to protect the retail investors of his or her state. Remember, that could vary from state to state. So in your future, you're going to take an entire exam on state administrators. And it's going to be your 66. Half of it's going to be what I'm talking about. In California, Chris, I retired to Nevada, and I feel bad that I don't miss California as much as I thought I was going to. But when I got here to Nevada, I said, "Hey, what's the last call?" They go, "Dean, there isn't a last call." I go, "Oh my God, you mean I got to toss myself out of this bar?" And then I saw a guy with a firearm. I said, "Well, thank you for your service." And he goes, "What do you mean?" I said, "Aren't you a police officer?" He goes, "No, it's open carry." I'm like, "Oh my God." Anyways, our brother likes to target shoot, and I said, "Well, buy me a pistol, and I'll go shoot with you." And he goes, "Well, what do you want?" I said, "Just pick out something. I'll give you discretion. Buy me whatever pistol you think is good." And he got it for me, and I paid him. And he said, "Well, Dean, don't take it to California." I go, "Why?" He said, "The clip is an 18-round clip, and I guess that's a felony in California."
Yeah.
Like, wow, I'm like crazy, right? So now that's called the North American Security Administrator Association. So the test question here is we got to make sure if we do need to register a security, Chris, we may have to register the security not only with the SEC, but with the state administrator. We might have to register our broker dealer not only with the SEC and FINRA, but the state administrator. We might have to register you as an agent of the broker dealer with both the SEC, FINRA, and the state administrator. So, you're going to be registered with the state of California as well, right? The state administrator. Federal Reserve Board, quite a few questions here. Now, we're talking here about the Federal Reserve Board as a regulator of banks, but you also get some economics questions about the Fed. Is the Federal Reserve Board in charge of fiscal policy or monetary policy?
Monetary.
Right on, right? And they have tools available to them, Chris. The most common tool that the Fed uses is open market operations. They buy and sell government securities. I kind of teased you in one of our previous sessions that if somebody asks you about economics, finance, or investments, you want to sound smart, you should say it has a lot to do with interest rates. And people say, "What about them?" They fluctuate. Is that good news or bad news? It depends. Right now, the Fed is selling government securities, causing the price of the securities to go up and the yields to go, the price go down, the yield go up. And that's called tightening. They're tightening monetary policy. And so then you get tested on, what happens when interest rates go up. When interest rates go up, it makes the dollar stronger, right? Because it's a more attractive place for people to invest if the dollar is strong. You get tested about how a strong dollar impacts the balance of trade, right? Here, a strong dollar is going to have a negative impact on our balance of trade because we as US citizens can buy more foreign stuff cheaper, tequila, whatever it happens to be. And we're going to ask you about that dollar going up or down and how that affects balance of trade. Dollar gets weaker, right? Then it helps the balance of trade. So you're going to get a handful of economics questions on your SIE. Nothing, like I say, nothing too dramatic, but, you should be familiar with fiscal policy, monetary policy, who controls it, that kind of thing. Okay, so SIPC we talked about, you did a pretty good job on that. FDIC is for banks, problems of the rich. I had a guy who told me he has to keep track of he doesn't put too much money in any one bank. And I thought, man, that's a champagne problem. I felt kind of stupid because I never even worry about Wells Fargo, Bank of America. I mean, maybe I should, but I don't, I guess if you have enough money, then it's worthwhile. Very testable, very testable. Accredited investors are allowed to participate in certain types of investments that other folks cannot. So this is very testable about what is an accredited investor. So I say, Chris, I have a very good, very special investment opportunity for you. This is, Chris, an investment by invitation only. And before I extend the invitation to you, the private placement memorandum, hint, private placement, private. This isn't a public thing. Remember, 33 says that we're selling brand new securities to the public. And here we're not selling the securities to the public. We're doing a private placement. This is a exemption under 33. And so what makes you accredited?
Net worth of 250,000,
Nope, nope, nope.
300,000.
I think a good way to remember it is 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. $1 million net worth.
Excuse me. Yes, $1 million net worth combined.
Exclusive of your primary residence. So you say, Dean, I don't have that. I go, well, hold on, Chris, I got another one. I got another one. I say, so Chris, you don't have $1 million net worth exclusive of your primary residence. Do you make 200 grand? That's the 200 grand for the last 2 years with the expectation of 200 grand this year. You say, nope. I go, okay, well, hold on. I got another one. I got another one. Are you married and filing jointly? Are you married and filing jointly? You say, I am. I say, do you and your significant other make $300,000 for the last 2 years with the expectation of that this year? If so, I can put you into the private placement. So I go remember it is 1, 2, 3. The 1 is for $1 million net worth. The 2 is for the 200,000. The 3 is for the 300,000. Now, another very important thing, Chris, is if you accept this invitation, you're buying securities that have never been registered under 33. So that's an important term. You're buying what we call unregistered securities. And there's an important, you're buying unregistered securities, because if in the future, Chris, there is a public marketplace for these securities in the future, or even presently, if there's a public marketplace, if you have unregistered securities, you can't dump them or sell them into that public marketplace until you register them. And so how long do you have to hold unregistered securities that you receive directly from the issuer in a private placement before you can sell them?
6 months.
Right on. Good job. Good job. Now, in the institutional category, not all institutional investors are quibs, but some institutional investors are quibs. They are qualified institutional buyers of securities. Qualified institutional buyers. And again, there's a couple test questions here. What makes an institutional investor a quib? What amount of assets do they need under management to be a quib?
I don't remember.
100 million or more.
That's right.
100 million or more. Now, the good news about being a quib, if they are a quib, the second test question is, what are they allowed to do? As a quib, remember, it makes sense because remember the SEC and state administrators are trying to protect Joe Sixpack retail investors. They're not trying to protect quibs. This would be like T. Rowe Price, Fidelity, BlackRock. All those people are quibs. They're capable of protecting their own assets, their own interests, right? And so what they're allowed to do is buy unregistered foreign and domestic securities. So for example, SpaceX. There is no public marketplace for SpaceX. And 2 of the major shareholders are T. Rowe Price and Fidelity. Right. And so they are quibs. And so they can, if Elon needs some money for SpaceX, he can call a quib and say, hey, who knows? Elon might need some money right now. I mean, I know nothing about private finances, but another thing you get tested on is what's called a pipe. A pipe. And that is a private investment in a public entity. A private investment in a public entity. So, Chris, I was just watching the management team of Tesla give their presentation. Oh my God. And they were talking about what they plan on becoming someday in terms of cars. And they were talking about how many billions and billions of dollars in capital they're going to need to execute their business plan. And so one thing Tesla might want to do to raise some money is a pipe. They might call a quib like T. Rowe Price and say, hey, how would you like to buy stock in Tesla directly from Tesla? Remember, and in this example, they're buying it directly from Tesla. It's an unregistered security, right? They're buying an unregistered security in this public entity, Tesla. And, the reason they'd buy it is because Tesla might give them a good deal, right? Tesla says, hey, listen, we can just sell it directly to you and we don't have to hire, Morgan Stanley. We'll give you a deal. And then the idea is T. Rowe Price would have to hold that for at least
6 months. There
you go, right? And that's called a pipe. Now, it doesn't have to be a quib, but that's typically the way it shows up on your exam. I just posted in social media a little short on Mark Cuban, and he said no to a pipe. The issuer had called Mark Cuban and said, hey, how about a pipe? And he said, no, thank you. In fact, the CEO who called him bungled it so badly that not only did he say no, that when he hung up the phone, he sold his stock. And then the SEC came after him for material non-public information. Mark won. He said, no, I never signed any non-disclosure. Everybody knew about this pipe. And, he beat the SEC, which I thought was kind of cool. And then he said, listen, I didn't want to fight the SEC, but boy, they needed some pushback. Good news for me, I have the resources to fight the government, the SEC, but a lot of Joe Sixpack investors don't. So I'm doing this for the little guy. All right, Mark, boo. All right, so broker dealers, you're going to work for a broker dealer. A lot of us don't want to do our own back office. So I used to use it as a positive thing, Chris. I'd say, I can't steal what I don't touch. So Chris at Gamma Global, I'm not holding your monies or securities. I have a clearing firm, Pershing. I have a clearing firm, National Financial. I'm introducing you to my clearing firm. They're the ones that are holding your monies and securities. So on your statement, it would say Gamma Global Investments as introduced to Pershing. That's called an introducing firm. A clearing firm is somebody who can process a trade, right? They have an order department, they have a purchase and sales department, a margin department, a cashier. I haven't had anybody debrief. I got into it with the Kaplan guy who wrote the SIE book because I didn't like his definitions of prime brokers and clearing brokers. And, and we went back and forth. I said, listen, I was in this business. I'm telling you, that's not correct, your definition there. And then we both agreed it didn't matter because nobody told us they'd seen it. So, so as I said, not everything in the document happens to show up. Now, we did talk about an investment advisor. Do you remember, we're talking about firms here. Do you recall the distinction between how broker dealers make money and how investment advisors make money? The business models are different, and that difference is testable.
Investment advisors as in like hedge funds?
Well, any investment advisor, you're on the right track. Any investment advisor. If I give you investment advice, Chris, I'm going to tell you, I'm in the business of giving investment advice. And I want compensation. We call that the ABC test. So if a firm gives investment advice, they're in the business of giving investment advice, and they want compensation, they're an investment advisor. In our previous session, as you recall, Chris, I told you I do give you investment advice, but I'm not in the business of giving investment advice. It's free. The broker dealer makes money, test question on transactions. Transactions, the broker dealer is either making a markup or a markdown when trading as a dealer or principal, or the brokerage firm makes a commission if they're trading at an agency. And investment advisors, you were talking about hedge funds, they charge fees. They don't charge you for transactions. They charge you fees. Now, Chris, you brought up a hedge fund. A hedge fund is organized as a partnership. And Chris, they're organized as private partnerships. So hedge funds are distributed as a private placement. So hedge funds aren't making public distributions. They say, Chris, would you like to be a limited partner in my hedge fund? So Chris, to be a limited partner in my hedge fund, you have to be accredited, or no hedge fund for you. You remember what that means? You need to have $1 million or 200 or 300, or you're not going to be able to participate in a hedge fund. The typical fee structure, Chris, for a hedge fund is 2 and 20. I'm going to want 2% of the assets under management. I'm going to want 20% of the profits. Wow. But your point, the general partner, the hedge fund manager, is an investment advisor. Now, most investment advisors don't charge 2 and 20. For example, Fidelity's investment advisory is Fidelity Management and Research. They're an investment advisor to the Fidelity funds. That investment advisory firm only has one client, but it's the Fidelity funds. Hey, if you're only going to have one customer, not a bad one to have. Ameriprise, you'd be surprised, right? How many billions are there in Minneapolis, right? So it's crazy. All right, so municipal advisors. So we have corporate finance and we have public finance. So corporate finance are men and women who raise money for corporations. Public finance are men and women who raise money for municipalities. And so if you're a municipal issuer, you're a city, you're a county, you're a state, you're a transit district, and you want to sell some bonds, you want to make sure you don't, run afoul of anything. So it behooves you to hire a professional. So, maybe San Francisco hires Morgan Stanley Public Finance about how to do a bond deal. And so Morgan Stanley, as municipal financial advisor, says, what I think you should do, City of San Francisco, is issue some special tax bonds and have a special tax on alcohol and tell the bondholders that that special tax on alcohol sold within San Francisco is going to pay the interest and the principal. That's my advice about how you should proceed. And they say, well, Dina, can you sell the bonds for us? I say, unfortunately, no. The MSRB does not allow a municipal advisor like myself, Morgan Stanley, to switch roles. They think it's too much of a conflict for me to represent the issuer, Morgan Stanley, and the Morgan Stanley customers. So a municipal advisor test question cannot switch their roles. And then I would say, okay, well, let's put it out to negotiated or, a competitive bid. Maybe the mayor says to me, he says, Dean, I really like you and you like me. And, I'm up for reelection and I could use a campaign contribution. And I said, well, the MSRB mayor prohibits me from making any campaign contribution to a political official that I can't vote for. So test question number 1. So Chris, this is called Rule G37. You don't need to know the rule numbers, but G37. The MSRB has A rules, administrative rules. They have G rules, general rules, and they have D rules, definitional rules. This is G37. There's 2 that I would be aware of. The other one is G20. And so we're talking about G37 about campaign contributions. Did you catch the first test point? I have to be able to vote for the mayor. Now, assuming I can vote for the mayor, then I can make a campaign contribution, which would be limited to how much money?
$250.
Right on. So, I said Morgan Stanley say to the city of San Francisco, listen, what I think we should do is call my buddy over at Merrill Lynch and negotiate the bond transaction with Merrill Lynch. And if you'd like, I can be your financial advisor and help you with that and set up the meeting. They go, yeah, let's do it. So I invite my buddy Merrill Lynch over and we negotiate this transaction. And he says, hey, Dean, that is so cool, man. Thank you so much for that referral. I say, well, hey, you do for mama, mama does for you. I say, hey, listen, I think you should take care of me. What do you mean? Test question number 2. What is the maximum gift or gratuity that an employee of one member firm, in my example, Morgan Stanley, can receive or give from an associated person of another firm, in my example, Merrill Lynch?
100.
Right on. Right now, by the way, FINRA has very similar rules. So FINRA has this exact same gift or gratuity rule. It's just not called G20. Right. So that rule is, a rule for everybody. All right. So issuers and underwriters, these are all the participants in the securities industry. Remember, you're getting tested on the securities industry essentials, and these are the players. So these are the players. A player. You know, we've talked about where we're fitting in as associated persons, but we have issuers, we have underwriters, and, you know, the issuer are going to sell securities either privately or publicly, and they're going to hire underwriters to do it. We talked earlier about traders and market makers. We have custodians who hold monies and securities for mutual funds or for retirement plans, whatever the case may be. We have trustees. We have transfer agents who affect change in ownership. You know, you need to kind of know what these people do. So, you know, if I want to cancel a stock certificate and a new one, I would go through the transfer agent to do that. And then, you know, good news for us, we don't have many stock certificates left. I have some younger men and women, and I have to assure them that stock certificates do indeed exist, but you may go through your whole career and never see one. And the reason you never see one is backstage, we have these depository companies, DTC and OCC, that are actually, you know, doing this behind the scenes. So that's kind of cool. Now, the one you get tested on is the Options Clearing Corporation, and that's very testable. So you remember some of the things they do besides clear trades, the option contracts, they are test question. The OCC test question is the issuer and guarantor of all options. So you say, hey, Dean, if I buy that Apple call, how do I know that I exercised that the person is going to give me the Apple stock? I say, Chris, that's a good point. And how do you, Chris, know that they're going to give you the money? What you're asking me about is contra-party risk, the risk that one party doesn't fulfill their responsibilities. And good news, you don't need to worry about that, Chris, because test question, the OCC is the issuer and guarantor of all option contracts. They stand between the two parties, making sure that you don't have to worry about whether somebody's going to fulfill their responsibilities. Remember, we also said they assign exercise notices. The OCC assigns exercise notices on option contracts. Do you know how the OCC does that? They do it test question randomly. Randomly, I would know that as well. We said, remember, they published the disclosure document we discussed earlier. So, you know, I'm just hinting that the OCC is the bigger deal. I wouldn't worry at all about the DTC, but the OCC I'd have a handle on. Well, the primary market is where the issuer receives the proceeds. So this would be like A, B, C, D. And we said that A, B, C, D, primary market, issuer receives the proceeds. And the secondary market, the previous owner receives the proceeds. And the two major secondary markets or market centers are New York for stocks and NASDAQ. Those are the two major securities market centers. You know, New York Stock Exchange or the National Association of Securities Dealers Automated Quotation System. Now, the New York Stock Exchange can best be characterized as an auction market. And what we mean there is that they're not trading against you. They're just matching buyers with sellers. I think the best analogy, Chris, would be the art market. I say, Chris, I see that beautiful painting behind you there. Did you get that as a primary transaction or a secondary transaction? I'm asking, did you get that from the artist? That would be a primary transaction. Let's be clear. Gauguin is not getting 30 million bucks. Gauguin got 30 bucks from some tourist in Tahiti. You know, when that gets traded, it's somebody else that's buying. It's a secondary transaction. Now, if, Chris, you want to buy art in the secondary market, one way you can do it is go to Sotheby's or Christie's. Those are auction houses. They don't trade against customers. They just match buyers with sellers and take commish. Another way you can buy art is to go to an art dealer. Uh-oh, better be a little more careful in this transaction, right? Because that dealer has inventory. He's buying the art at a bid and he's selling at the ask. And I don't think there's a 5% policy in the art market, you know. And remember, NASDAQ, remember, is a negotiated quote-driven market. Negotiating, remember, quote-driven means we have that quote we talked about in an earlier session. And a bid and an ask, and then, you know, you don't have to pay my bid and ask, but you can negotiate. You say, well, Dean, I'm willing to pay. You know, we talked about limit orders in a previous discussion, right? So those are our two big ones. then you nailed the test question, Chris. There are some over-the-counter stocks that don't trade on NASDAQ. So we do have some non-NASDAQ OTC stocks. And the only thing we care about those is if they're under $5. By the way, a NASDAQ stock under 5, a New York Stock Exchange stock under 5 is not a penny stock. If it's $2 on the New York, it's not a penny stock. If it's $1 on NASDAQ, it's not a penny stock. It's a non-NASDAQ. Okay, third market, these are just definitional. Maybe I don't want to pay the New York their fee. And so I might want to consider doing my trade in the third market. Test question. This is recognition, as I told you, most of your SIE is. And the third market can best be characterized, test question, is listed securities traded over the counter. Where are you at in Los Angeles? Are you in Los Angeles area in California? Where are you at? Where you have?
Los Angeles.
Ooh, so a legendary firm in Los Angeles, Chris, is called Jeffries. And Jeffries is like Denny's. They're always open 24/7. They're down there by the beach. It was funny. I was tutoring a guy in the building and he said, Dean, this is the damnedest Starbucks. This Starbucks is open 24 hours. I don't know why. I said, well, I can tell you why, because Jeffries trading floor is in this building and those guys are there 24/7 trading securities. So if you own a listed stock, for example, and the markets are open or not open, you could call Jeffries and ask for a quote, and you can do the trade, at midnight if you'd like. That's called a listed security traded over the counter. So that means, for example, GE is a New York stock. Any trade that takes place outside New York is going to be a third market. As I told you, this is definitional. Fourth market test question is direct trading between institutions. So we've been talking about these institutional investors. We've been talking about not all institutional investors are quibs, but we have been talking about several quibs. We've been talking about BlackRock and Fidelity and T. Rowe Price. And if T. Rowe Price wants to sell a 10 million share block of Tesla and Fidelity wants to buy, they say, should we call Dean, our broker, and put him in the middle so he can charge us a commission? And what do you think they're going to say to that? No. Let's just do it between the two of us. So that's direct trading between institutions. They have their own electronic communication network. That's called an ECN. So that they can, trade with each other. I'm being facetious, Chris, but if I could find it, I'd blow it up, right? Because then they'd have to go back through brokers. So I always joke, if you're an intermediary, you're a middleman, you can rest assured that people are trying to take you out of the loop. So, by the way, they're doing more and more of this. The institutional investors are more and more doing their own thing, right? Say, hey, should we call the Goldman guy? Nah, But sometimes they actually hire the Goldman guys to come represent them. Okay, we did talk about this. This is very testable, this economics component. Again, mainly recognition, but you do need to know the difference between monetary policy and fiscal policy. Monetary policy is the money supply. And you need to know that monetary policy is controlled by the Federal Reserve Board. I told you, Chris, I'm demented. I'm into this. And so Jerome Powell was giving his congressional testimony yesterday and Dean's watching. And a lot of times the senators would ask him something and he would respond with, that's a question about fiscal policy, Senator. And we don't engage in the Fed in any discussions of fiscal policy. We are in charge of monetary policy. So too much money chasing too few goods is bad. So what's that called? This is what the Fed is worried about right now. Too much money chasing too few goods. Lawrence Summers, Chris, is one of my favorite economists. And Lawrence Summers said that we went a little crazy on the fiscal policy, during COVID. And he said, listen, I think during the pandemic, we probably should have done some stuff to help with that last dose of fiscal stimulus. Woo! I'm Chris, I went to my mailbox and they gave me a check. I didn't really need it, but I'm like, well, thank you so much. So that's called inflation, right? That's going to be bad. And too many goods and not enough money, that is bad too. That's called deflation. So the Fed wants to make sure there's not too much money in the economy, too little money in the economy. They have a dual mandate, a dual mission, and the biggest mission you get tested on is price stability. Price stability, that's what the Fed's doing. So in the congressional testimony, Mr. Powell said, listen, our dual mandate is price stability and full employment. And right now, nobody's worried about full employment. In fact, we think there's too much of it. And right now, we're concerned about our first mission, which is price stability. So I'm sorry, Senator, I can't tell you about what I'm going to do with interest rates. But I foresee that we might have to keep them higher and longer than we'd like because we're trying to dent demand. So remember we talked about this open market operations of the Fed? So you are going to get tested on open market operations of the Fed, buying and selling government securities. And so as I told you right now, the Fed is selling government securities. And so when the Fed is selling government securities, the money supply goes down. Tracks. And if there's less money available, you might have to borrow it. And the most important thing to know is that interest rates go up. And that's what's happening right now. The Fed is following their tight monetary policy. And as I told you, Mr. Powell said he's going to do that as long as it takes to get inflation back to their target of 2%. From 2010 till very recently, the Fed was buying government securities. In 2010, the balance sheet of the Fed was $700 billion, Chris. And until they reversed course, it passed $4 trillion. So the Federal Reserve Board spent $3.3 trillion buying government securities. And the test question is when the Open Market Committee is buying the government securities, govies, the money supply goes up. There's loose monetary policy. And interest rates go down. I told you these interest rates are testable. So you see these interest rates here. And as I told you, both of these interest rates are testable. So a chance to demonstrate your prowess or a lack thereof on these interest rates. So which one of these two, Chris, is set directly by the Fed?
Federal funds rate.
And that's all right. It's the discount rate. So the discount rate is set directly by the Fed. It's the only rate set by the Fed. You know, what they're targeting is the Fed funds rate. Fed funds rate is very testable. Banks with excess reserves, lending to banks with deficient reserves. And this is the most volatile of all the rates you're held accountable for. Right? So if they ask you which rate is, the most volatile, you would say Fed funds. Now, in earlier sessions, we talked about the remaining two, which was prime and broker call. I wouldn't worry on your SIE too much about a financial statement. I would definitely know the classical balance sheet equation, which is assets minus liabilities equals net worth. You should definitely know the definition of a recession in the business cycle and the definition of a depression in the business cycle. And the way we measure the economy is through what we call gross domestic product. That's how we measure. That's the test question. Total goods and services an economy produces, GDP. And so what would be the definition of a recession as it relates to the GDP? Very testable, 2 calendar quarters. So yeah. 2 calendar quarters of declining GDP is a recession. That is testable. So and again, you're taking your test during a very current economic kind of discussion, right? People are afraid that the Fed is going to be too successful in denting demand and that they might accidentally put us into a recession. And Mr. Powell said, well, so far, we agree, Senator, that it could be a problem, but so far we're denting demand and people are still got jobs. And so he went as far as almost to say, without saying, yes, if we need to put the economy into a recession, we will do it. So when I see people being interviewed during the COVID thing, they were like, you think it'll be a depression? A depression test question is 6 calendar quarters of declining GDP. So God, that would be, 18 months of, declining GDP. All right. So business cycle, I just told you what you get tested on that business cycle is this idea about, where we're at in the business cycle in terms of recession or depression. I wouldn't worry about any indicators except leading indicators. And the leading indicator I would know is stock prices, because the stock market's all about earnings or future expectations of earnings. And so, coincident tell us where we're at in the business cycle, lagging tell us where we've been. And again, I wouldn't worry too much on that. I would know that cyclical stocks are stocks that do well during the upward phase of the business cycle, not so well. I joke when cyclical stocks, when times are good, they're really, really good. But when they're bad, they're really, really bad. The one that shows up on the test are defensive stocks. And defensive stocks deliver products and services resilient to the business cycle. Products and services resilient to the business cycle. So what would be some companies whose products and services would be resilient to the business cycle?
Pharmaceutical.
Right on. If you're sick and I'm a doctor and I tell you need a drug, you're going to get it. I said, Chris, if you don't get the right drug, you're going to die. Yeah, right on. What else?
Tobacco.
Yeah, we could make an argument that won't show up on the test, but yeah, people who smoke. One guy left paying $4 billion back. What I was looking for is food and utilities. Right? Nobody wants to go back to the Stone Age. Right? It might come back on usage, but not entirely. Now, there's only one economist that you need to know by name. There isn't truth. It's just a way of explaining things, and his name is Lord John Maynard Keynes. And Lord John Maynard Keynes would have been during the pandemic thinking, oh, right. Mr. Keynes said that when the economy is weak, it's because of lack of demand. And the people who have resources won't spend them, and the other people don't have the resources. And so what Mr. Keynes said is that the government should step on the accelerator called government spending to stimulate demand. And so that's called demand side economics, which sees, the government as a positive influence on the business cycle. And as I told you, Larry Summit said he was all for the demand side economics that Congress and the president were doing during COVID, except that last one. He said, I thought that was a little bit too much on the demand side, right? We talked about balance of payments, balance of trade, and how interest rates affect that. So let's just now add that to our little discussion here. So I said that when the money interest rates go up, the dollar goes up as well. And when the dollar goes down, or excuse me, interest rates go down, the value of the dollar goes down. And that impacts the balance of trade, balance of payments or balance of trade. And so what they want you to come up on the test, I struggle with this because I'm too much economics on my brain. But what they want you to know is that a strong dollar has a negative effect on the balance of trade. Because again, we can buy more, foreign goods. So that's been going on right now as well. As we said, the Fed has been raising interest rates, the dollar is becoming stronger, and that means we can import more stuff. And then they want you to know on the test that a weak dollar has a positive effect on the balance of trade because now, our exporters can sell stuff. Boeing can sell their planes for less yen. So that exports would go up and imports would go down. So weak dollar has a positive effect on the balance of trade. Balance of trade is just the things we buy or sell with our foreign friends, right? So I joke, the dollar is strong right now as compared to the peso, right? It used to be 10 pesos a buck, now it's 20. So, my bottle of tequila was 50, is now 25. So that means Dean's going to buy more of it, right? If the dollar is weak, then it takes more pesos to buy my tequila, and it makes the tequila less competitive. So again, they're not asking on the SIE to be an economist. They're mainly just asking not to embarrass the firm at a cocktail party. All right, so it looks like we're almost got this done. I unfortunately have a guy right behind you, but let's finish up this section here real quick. We talked about investment bankers who underwrite securities, underwriting. You definitely need to know when we do a public offering, we're going to make a registration statement. We're going to enter into the quiet time or cooling off period, which is a minimum of
20 days.
20 days, indeed. We can do a follow-on offering by doing what's called a shelf registration. We have two types: best efforts, firm commitment. A shelf registration means we have the securities on the shelf, Chris. They're registered, and we can take down our shelf from the SEC. For example, Disney used its shelf registration to pay for Fox. They gave the Fox shareholders Disney stock that they had registered, but they had not issued. Now, if it's a well-known seasoned issuer of securities like Disney, that shelf registration is good for 3 years. We said munis are exempt from 33, and so they don't have prospectuses, they have official statements. And we said we may have to register that with the state. So I'm pretty quick here because, we got a session, but you've been a good customer. So I will offer you again, with the assumption that contrary exercise advice, I want you to get some sleep and I want you to, be well rested. And I don't want to go backwards. But if I'm done with this next session in an hour, if you want, I'm more than willing to reconvene with you, do a little better job on that. And the only other thing I think we haven't discussed is section 4, but that's completely up to you. And like I say, I'll just comp that to you because you don't have time to go to the booking page and pay me and do all that stuff. But that's completely up to you. So what would you like to do? Would you like to get some rest? I would recommend that. Or would you like to reconvene about 6:30 and finish up this thing?
I mean, the regulatory framework is, it's only 7 questions, right? Which is
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. I love it. I love it. You're getting the waiting down. Woohoo!
Yeah, I'm sure I can.
I like it. I like it.
I'm sure I can answer at least
cool. If you need
5
to,
of them.
you have my cell phone number. I tried to call you. You should have my cell phone
Yes,
number.
I just, I received it.
Hippocratic oath. Don't call me from the exam. Oh my God, I had this lady. Dean, where are you? I'm at the exam. I go, how do you still have your phone? Hang up now. But if you need me, reach me, feel free to give me a call or whatever. But again, I would more want you to be worried about your psyche, putting on your game face, relaxing, whatever you need to do to relax. I like to smoke a stogie and have a nice scotch, but whatever you need tonight to kind of get in the right mental spot for tomorrow. What time you test?
11 o'clock.
Woohoo!
12 o'clock. 12 o'clock.
Okay, so if you need me tomorrow morning, just give me a call. And like I say, I'll be with you, sending you good test vibes if I don't hear from you. And do check in with me afterward because I'm kind of, invested at this point in your success. So
we'll do, and I will most definitely be back again, and for the 7 after the 66.
Yeah, the
so
work
we
you
can
do
get
here
the
will
journey
pay
with me.
dividends on your 7 because it's the same stuff, a little more depth. So
Okay,
I gotta
sounds
get
good.
to my next tutoring session, and I'll talk to you later.
We'll do. Don't want to hold you up. Thank you,
Video,
Dean.
by the way, this is being recorded, so as soon as it processes, I'll send it to you.
Gotcha. Thank you. Thank you.
You bet.
Thank you, Dean.
Bye-bye.
Have a good night. Bye bye.